Sometimes I wish that you all could be a part of the conversations that go on up here before services. If this conversation would have happened earlier, Larry indicated that my lessons would be a lot better if they lasted 3.5 minutes. So, sorry, I already had this one planned out, so maybe next week will be 3.5 minutes long. So, he said I could probably keep your attention in that amount of time. But this morning, I added a group to the prayer list in the announcements. How many of you noticed an addition? This is also my barometer to see how many people read the projector up there too. So maybe I might have to start slipping things in. I added the young people of the church. And not only was I referring to those here at Sugar Creek, but it also includes the young of the church throughout the world. And there are several reasons that caused me to do that. In thinking about my own prayers and thoughts, I know that there are some times when I will pray for all of my nephews in addition to Caroline. I have one that is about to graduate, and I think about all the decisions that will be coming his way, along with all the pressures that come with being a senior in high school, to do those things that a Christian should not do. I have 3 other nephews that are getting closer to the teenager years, and we all know what goes along with those years. And then the final 2, well, Shelly is the mom, so they need all the help they can get.
Amen.
I knew I could count on Travis. But seriously though, even them at the young age that they are, they can start to pick up on things. So, I think about this and think about my prayers and including them in prayers at times. And then I think about I thought about the prayer list. And as we mentioned the sick physically and spiritually, but we tend to leave out the youth. And then also the same, and I'm not criticizing anybody's prayers that are given, but the same thing listening to the prayers that are given is that the youth are rarely ever mentioned. And you might not have thought about this too much. And I had to change this number actually. Leland, you have too many kids, and I left one out. But did you realize that almost 21% of our congregation is made up of those under 20? Now, I get that that's only 11, but that is still a pretty significant number when you think about the amount the size of the congregation here. And the youth are in a very important group that we should not forget about. In the church in general, and especially we do not want to forget about them here at Sugar Creek. And I know that in some other congregations there are a lot of focus on youth because the numbers are a lot greater than what we have here. And that is good, as long as the focus is directed at becoming or growing to be stronger and faithful Christians. And this morning, that is exactly what we're going to talk about, is we are going to talk about and spend some time talking about the youth. The first thing I want us to look at is the importance of the youth. Again, I'm sure that each of us would, in our minds, we realize how important the youth are. Especially more so when they're your children, right? When you're thinking about your own children here, you're really focused on them a lot. Now, there are a few of us that still have children here, and some of the others that have children that have grown on, but you still think about them even though they may not consider it youth anymore. But we think about the youth, and we need to make sure that even though if we do not have any youth here anymore, we need to think about those youth and realize that there are importance in the youth. Because we can look at the Bible and we can see this. If you would turn to Matthew chapter 19, verse 13, beginning at verse 13. Matthew 19, beginning at verse 13 there. It says, "Then were there brought unto him little children, that he should put his hands on them and pray. And the disciples rebuked them. And Jesus said, Suffer the little children and forbid them not to come after me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. And he laid his hands on them and departed thence." Here we have the disciples, they were kind of getting after those who had brought children to Christ. They, for whatever reason, and my guess is in their minds that they thought that this was something that was not important enough for Christ to have to deal with right now. That he had so many more pressing issues. And he didn't have time for these young ones to be brought before him. But we see in this account, Jesus didn't agree with them, did he? If you look over in the account in Mark chapter 10, verse 14, it says that he was displeased that these disciples were discouraging those young to be brought to him. But in both accounts, we see that Christ's response was that he wanted them to be brought to them, or to be brought to him. Why? Because they were important. They were important enough to come to him. He did have time for them. It wasn't that he had so many other pressing things. There were so many more important things. These youth were important. And if we are not careful, we might find ourselves thinking the same thing as the disciples. That the youth aren't as important. We have so many other important issues at hand that we do not have time to worry about the youth. We have so much to get accomplished in our lives to take the time for the young. We work long hours. We have our own stuff that we need to get done. Or maybe it is that we don't have time to address the spiritual stuff because we are too busy running our children to soccer practice tonight, to flute practice tomorrow, and on we can go. We don't spend the time or the focus and importance on the spiritual issues with them. Or even in the church. We don't have time to spend upon these youth because we have so many more important things like reaching those who are lost. We have so many different needs to address in the congregation, this issue or that issue, and we don't really have the time to focus on the youth. We must not find ourselves in that, because we can look back in the Old Testament and see how important the youth were. And we can see the results of not giving them the focus that they needed. Very familiar verse, you talk about and you think about Joshua. Israel when he was leading them, they were faithful unto God under his leadership. But we see in Judges chapter 2, verse 10, that those following him, those generations following, they were not the same. Because in Judges 2:10 it says, and also all that generation were gathered together unto their fathers, meaning the generation that Joshua had led. And there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor the works which he had done for Israel. Why did they not know? Could it have been because the value of the youth was overlooked while they were serving God and trying to go out and conquer the land of Canaan? We don't know for certain, but that could have been one of the issues why the youth didn't know and did not know about God, because they were overlooked. We must make sure that we do not forget about the youth and their importance, because we need to realize, because we realize that if we do, there will be a generation after us that knew not the Lord. And we want to make sure that that is never the case, because the youth are the future of the church, and therefore they have great importance. Going along with the importance of the youth is, part of seeing that importance of the youth is to realize that they need instruction. They need taught. The youth need to be taught. More importantly, they need to be instructed in God's way. While it is important for us to make sure that we teach the youth non-spiritual things, as they're young, we teach kids little kids don't play in the street. Don't touch the hot stove. And we do that, why? To keep them safe. To try and protect them the best that we can. And it is important to teach them those things. We also make sure that they are taught and educated at the schools, because we want them to be able to function in life. We want them to be able to go on and to support themselves. And while all of that is good and important for us, we must realize that the most important thing that we can teach them is the Word of God. And to focus on those things that are spiritual. Again, familiar verses that you've heard quoted before. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And then Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 18 through 20. Therefore shall ye lay up these my words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be as frontlets between your eyes. And ye shall teach them your children, speaking of them, when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest in the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt write them upon the doorposts of thy house, and upon thy gates. The emphasis in here is to teach. Teach those who are young. But I think if we look at these verses here, we see that this goes beyond just teaching them facts about the Bible. And what I mean by that is, who was Joseph? And the fact that he had a coat of many colors. That Jonah was swallowed by a big fish. that Jesus allowed Peter to walk on water. All of those things are good to know, but we need to make sure that we teach and train our kids more than just Bible facts. Just things that they can look and say, this happened in the Bible. I think if we look at these two verses that we just read, we can see that there is more than that. That we need to be teaching them that spiritualness and doing what God wants is a way of life, and that they need to have understanding. Again, not that they can just recall a lot of facts about the Bible, but they understand how to apply those facts, those applications. If you look back in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, it says to train up a child in the way he should go. Not in what he remembers, not in the verses he can quote, but in the way he should go, meaning how he lives or how they live, how they should behave. And that is that same idea that played through Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 18 through 20. The fact that teaching is always occurring, always looking for opportunities. Because this is teaching of the youth is more than just a set time on Sunday, Wednesday, or even set times at our home. It should be everywhere there is an opportunity to teach. That's when we should take advantage of that, teaching those young. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12 says, Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity. That is instructions given to those who are young, to be an example of these things. How are they going to be those examples? How are they going to follow through with this if they have no idea how to do it? If they don't know what it means, what their conversation should be like, they don't know what love means. They don't have faith. They don't have purity because they have never been taught. They can't do that. And it is our responsibility to teach them and make sure that they understand those things that we teach them and the things that the Bible wants them to know. We also must realize that when we teach by example. For those of you who still can remember Michael Jordan, I know it's getting further and further away when he played. What was one of his trademark characteristics? It was that wagging tongue, wasn't it? When he was about to make a big move, that tongue started sticking out. And from what I have read or what I recall, when he was asked why he did that, his response was that he guessed that he learned that from his dad. Because that's what his dad would do whenever he was out working in the shop. He would stick his tongue out as he worked. He saw that by example. And that became a part of his life. A lot of the teaching, a lot of what the young learn is from those times that are outside of Bible class and services. And that is by your examples. The examples that you set before them. Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven. That goes for the youth as well. It isn't just for those that are non-Christians. We're not just shining our light to them, but we are shining our light to all of those who are faithful and to those who are young. That they can look at us and can see how they should be living. Because sometimes kids are smarter than we give them credit for, aren't they? They can process and they can realize when you tell them to do something while you do not follow what you just told them. I have to admit, I know admitting time now, there have been times when I have told Caroline that she shouldn't do something. And her response to me is, but you do. And then I have to kind of excuse it, but it doesn't work. But they can see this. They can understand that whenever we are telling them to do something, they're looking at our examples to say, are you doing the same thing? Are you living the way that you are teaching us? They can tell whether or not we are being hypocrites. An example plays in a very important role, a part of teaching. The young must be taught the Bible no matter how much extra work it takes or how much time it takes, because the future of the church and their spiritual being is at stake. It isn't just, oh, well, we missed it. There are going to be repercussions of this if we do not do this. And it needs to start from the beginning. We cannot wait until they are old enough. Because by that time, they have already picked up so many things from the world that conflict with what the Bible teaches, it might be too late. Because whenever the world teaches, does it wait until they are old enough to learn? No. They start teaching from the very beginning. The world tries to influence and tries to teach our kids, the youth, what they should not be doing from the very beginning. That's why we must be prepared to teach the Word of God from the very beginning. It is never too early to start. Another thing that we need to look at and think about when we are talking about our youth is that our youth need to have fellowship with other youths with the same desire to be pleasing to God. Talking about and thinking about this fellowship that they have with one another, or who they fellowship with. About a month or so ago, when I was doing the Wednesday night classes, we were talking about Christians. And we spent some time talking about the characteristics of a Christian and what they do and what they do not do. And one of those that we discussed was that they will not want to have fellowship with darkness. We saw that in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11. We talked about how we should not want to constantly be around those who are of the world. And we reference verses like 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. It says, Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? And then we also reference James chapter 4, verse 4. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is an enemy with God. We were talking about this fellowship, and we talked about the fellowship that a Christian will want to be around, that we don't want to constantly spend our time and be with those who are of the world, who are doing those things that are contrary to what a Christian should do. That is not who we should really want to be around all the time. And why is that? The purpose is because we do not want them to be negatively influencing us to do those things that are not right. And it can cause danger, the dangers that are there, because they might want to cause us to stray away and to sin. We understand that as Christians. We understand that's what we say. We try not to do. So why is it that we do not pay attention to that when we are talking about those who are young? Because when they are probably in a more susceptible state to be persuaded to follow others than a mature Christian. Because let's be honest, most of the time spent that the young spend with are those who are not faithful. But and it is again, it's not just because it's because that the world around, we do too. We are around more time than not. We are around those who are of the world, right? We are around those. But a lot of the times the youth are around those who are of the world and do not want to do not have any desire to do what God wants. And again, because we have to be around them does not mean that that's who we desire to be around. And I think that's where we need to focus on. Is those youth, we lack trying to get them together and surround them with others who are of the same mindset as they are and wanting to learn about God. You think about Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 through 25. It says, And let us consider one another to provoke and to love and to good works. So it says, let us think about one another's, let's provoke one another's to do good, to love and to do good works. How do we do that? Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. We say that we meet together. One of the reasons that we meet together is to be exhorted, uplifted by one another. And that should go to the youth as well. To be around other Christians, to be around others who are striving to be faithful and obedient to God. It will uplift them. It will help them. It is very important for them to spend time with others who are trying to live faithful, so that they can learn from others, so that they can help each other get through tough times. They can build lasting relationships. They can see that there are others who are faithful and they are not alone. And that they can understand that you can't have fun without doing sinful things in the world. I think sometimes that is a big reason why kids do things that are wrong, because the kids that they're around, the people that they're around, are influencing them and telling them that you cannot have fun unless you're doing something wrong. But when you're around a group of others, I think that you will clearly see that you definitely can have fun and still be doing what a Christian should do. But I'm sure that if you have had children, you know that for about 10 years or so, as parents, we do not know anything we're talking about. Regardless of what we might tell them, and regardless of the teachings that we teach them, we don't know what they're talking about. So you know what? To get them into a group of peers that are telling them the same things that mom and dad are telling them, who are living the same way that mom and dad has said that you needed to live, guess what? They might listen to them. They might learn from their examples as well. And like I mentioned before, we have 11 that are under 20 here in the congregation. And the ages range from 18 to, I think, 2. So there is a large span. So it can be pretty difficult, can it, to be getting a group here together. Because Trey might feel a little left out being with a 2-year-old. But that means as adults, as the parents, we need to make sure that we put forth the effort to make sure that the young have opportunities to spend time with others in the church. We are lucky in that we are not the only congregation in the area. There are other congregations in the area, and there are other youths in those congregations who are also looking to spend time with other youths of like-minded as well. They're doing the same thing. Do we take advantage of those opportunities that are available and get the young together? And I'm talking about myself in this as well. Do we look for those opportunities? Do we take advantage of those? Because if we want the youth to grow and to become faithful Christians, they need to make sure that they have fellowship with others who want the same thing. That will help them on their way. And then finally, the last thing that we are going to talk about in the youth is the fact that we must engage the youth. We must engage them. As we already read in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, it says, "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, in purity." You know what all those things show? They show action. They show that the youth have a responsibility to do something, to act. Too many times we overlook what the youth can do and the benefits that they can bring to a congregation. If we're not careful, again, too many times we look at them and we say, well, these are just a bunch of kids. They don't really have a lot of value yet. Wait till they get older, then we'll put them to work. I would challenge you to remember back to last year. And I'm not sure if all of you can remember all these different events. But I wanted you to realize that last year, one of the most attended extra events, or whatever you want to call them, that we had here at the congregation was when we had the birthday celebration hosted by the children. And if you remember, they served hot dogs and chips, and I think why they got Charlie and Jean here was because they served ice cream. But they served those ice cream to us. But if you were able to attend, you can understand and you can see that it was more than just the parents who attended that. It was those who did not have any relation to any of those kids that were wanting to put this event on. And if you were there, you also saw that the kids and the adults had a great time. You can look and you can just see the joy that those kids were having in serving us. How important and how serious they were taking getting these orders and getting them back and making sure that we were getting the food. And that was one of the best attended events that we had. Then they also were taking the time and were making and sending out cards to those who were shut in or sick. They were doing a good work. And again, another time, they came and they assisted with one of the work days at the building, planting flowers by the sign. And again, I would point out, I believe that was one of the best attended work days we've ever had here. Because the youth were there, they were involved. And it not only was it that the youth were there, but the adults wanted to be there as well. To be there to help and to see those youth work. And if you missed that day, I'll tell you later, I just remembered as going through this, you missed out on one of the funniest things ever with Tabitha and Jose and the lawnmower. But you can ask me about that later. That was great. Glad I was reminded of that. But I hope that you notice the pattern is that these events not only benefited the youth, but they also benefited those adults who attended as well. They benefited the entire congregation. The point is that the young need to be engaged in the work. They need to see its importance, and they need to know how to work. If we are constantly doing everything for them, and never teaching them how to do any work or how to do anything basically, why would we expect them to know how to do it? To tell them you need to study, to tell them you need to go out and to teach, yet they've never been a part of that, how are they going to know how to do that? How are they going to understand what we mean? Are we taking advantage of those times whenever teaching and learning are happening? Do we make sure that the youth are there? Even if the class is geared more for adults, will they get as much out of it? Probably not. Will they get something out of it? They could. If they are really small, they may not get a single thing out of it. But you know what they do get out of it? They understand that it was important for them to be there. They understand that their parents and others took the time to take those opportunities out of their day and to make an effort to be there. They learn that if not anything else. In schooling and sports, we are always willing and we are always trying to push kids to improve and to get better. Why is it that sometimes we fail to do that when it comes to the youth of the church? We don't push them. We don't encourage them to do more. We don't encourage them to be engaged. We need to do that to make sure that the youth can grow up and to be the Christians that they need to be. Because as it has been said before, the church can always be one generation from going away. Or at least a congregation can always be one generation from going away. And why is that? It could be because of the lack of the importance placed on the youth, the lack of training, the lack of having fellowship with the wrong people, having fellowship with the wrong people, and the lack of having fellowship with the right people, and not being engaged in the work of God. We need to make sure that we do everything in our power that it will never be said of our youth, and there arose another generation after them, which knew not the Lord, nor yet the works which he had done. The youth are precious, and we must keep them in our thoughts and our prayers daily. So hopefully today you will understand and see the importance of our youth, and will think about them more often. Be more cognizant about each one of them, and make sure that we can do everything that we can do to try to make them the people and the Christians that they need to be. If there's any here this morning that have any need, if you would come forward as we stand and as we sing.